Luma and the Gentle Roads of Paris. Luma arrived in Paris when morning had only just begun to practice its colors, and the river wore the mild silver of a thoughtful mirror, and the streets near the water carried a hush that felt like a friendly secret shared by bridges and gulls, and the first lights in the windows looked like small promises learning to glow. She walked along the stone path beside the Seine, and the boats that slept against the quay made soft creaks that matched the rhythm of her paws, and the air tasted faintly of bread and clean stone and far tea. A barge shifted and then settled, and a person sweeping a doorway paused to watch her pass, and there was a quiet nod between them that meant we are both beginning, and the city agreed by straightening its shoulders in a kindly way. She visited a row of green boxes where books live by the river, and the keeper of the boxes lifted a lid and let the scent of pages breathe, and old maps showed the city like a careful garden of lines, and postcards kept the laughter of many years in their soft corners. Luma rested her paw on a map that drew a path from bridge to bridge and imagined the walk before it happened, and in that imagining her breath found a steady pace that felt like a smooth stone rolling in shallow water, and she thanked the map by folding it exactly as it wished to be folded. A bell from far away spoke once, and the sound drifted between roofs like a slow bird, and the day made room for that sound and then continued. A baker opened a door and warm air stepped out as a polite host to invite whoever wished to enter, and the baskets inside were heaped with bread that looked like friendly hills, and a tray of pastries shone with a light both golden and modest. Luma accepted a small roll, and the baker added a square of chocolate and said, "This is good for walking," and she agreed with a little bow and ate on a bench under a plane tree while pigeons wrote temporary stories upon the square with their soft feet. The roll held warmth inside it the way a pocket holds a pebble, and her paws felt grateful for the conversation between crunch and quiet. She crossed a bridge that held itself with old grace and paused in the center to count the ripples of a passing boat, and the boat answered with circles that traveled toward arches, and then leaned themselves into the stone as if asking, "May we rest here?" and the arches said yes in a language made of calm. On the island she found a little square where chairs faced one another like friends who enjoy good silence, and a florist arranged buckets of flowers into soft statements, and children followed a hoop that rolled as if it had its own gentle plans. A sparrow tried to look serious and failed, and the failure was perfect. She walked toward a cathedral that had learned patience over many years and stood with the dignity of a living book, and the carvings along the doors seemed to listen as well as speak, and candles inside made islands of warm light that did not disturb the water of the air. Luma did not need to say anything, she only let the cool stone steady her breathing, and the long aisle felt like a river that had decided to become a room for a while, and she drifted along that aisle with the respectful pace of someone greeting a wise elder. Outside again the pigeons approved of her manner by shaking their necks in a way that meant yes, and she smiled with her tail. By late morning the river had more to say, and she followed a path of benches and low walls, and artists set up easels and allowed colors to look for their places on a quiet canvas, and the brushes climbed and descended in lines that reminded her of stairways in the sky. A busker tested a tune on a violin and let it end before it began, and that ending was complete and kind, and the air seemed pleased by the courtesy. Luma crossed another bridge and the city arranged itself in layers, one for river, one for road, one for roofs, one for clouds, and each layer behaved like a page in a book that knows how to turn itself without tearing. In a small market street she found tables with fruit that looked like bright ideas, and cheese that looked like patient hills, and the shopkeepers greeted her with the sort of conversation that uses eyebrows and hands more than words, and the words that were used were soft and tasted of thanks. A woman cut a circle of apple into 4 quiet moons and placed one on a napkin for Luma, and the slice carried the temperature of sunlight that prefers to stay close to leaves, and it taught her mouth the lesson of simple sweetness. She carried a little bag of herbs that smelled of gardens after rain and tucked it into her scarf pocket as if storing a small world for later. The steps of a hill rose ahead and a stairway lifted her gently through patios where vines kept watch over old stone, and between the steps she paused to notice windows that held lace like well-mannered clouds, and a cat practiced the art of looking out while doing nothing about it, which is a noble art. At the top the city spread itself like a measured breath, and domes and roofs and trees introduced themselves without interrupting, and a carousel turned at ground level with the patience of a useful dream. Luma sat on a low wall and the wall remembered other visitors and warmed slightly in welcome, and a painter nearby added one more tiny blue to the sky and then stopped because the sky said thank you. She wandered into streets that folded around one another like scarves and found a cafe no larger than a kindness, and the owner placed a bowl of milk beside her and a cup of gentle tea for himself, and they shared that calm without turning it into an event. A notebook on the next table contained sketches of rooftops with chimney pots that looked like soft chess pieces, and the pencil had left a comfortable silence wherever it had moved. Across the lane a pastry cook sprinkled sugar with the same care used for telling a beloved story to a child at bedtime. Afternoon stepped forward in a color like warm linen, and the river prepared a wide ribbon of light for those who wished to float in their minds while remaining on the bank, and Luma walked beneath rows of trees whose leaves spoke in a dialect of polite whispers, and she let those whispers translate the day into easier sentences. She found a museum that once had been a station and now carried art like a train carries travelers, and huge clocks in the hall introduced her to the idea that time can also be a room if you let it, and sculptures stood in their own thoughts as if waking from long dreams that had taught them patience. The calm inside those galleries felt like a blanket drawn over the knees of the afternoon. Later she followed the river until it decided to shake hands with gardens, and in those gardens chairs faced fountains and fountains practiced the rise and fall that makes the mind feel nested, and children sailed little wooden boats across a pond where the wind acted as a gentle parent and the strings of the boats learned a tender geometry. A gardener misted roses, and each drop found its place with grateful clarity, and a reader closed a book with respect and allowed the story to keep speaking inside the chest, and a bench remembered the shape of those who had leaned back with relief. Luma leaned back with them. As evening approached, lamps along the river grew thoughtful and joined the talk in little golden voices, and bridges kept that talk safe by carrying it from bank to bank, and the water held a translation for anyone who did not speak lamp or bridge, which is a generous service. People walked in pairs and in quiet groups and sometimes alone, and each face wore the slow unwinding that comes after being kindly occupied for many hours, and the air collected their ease and returned it as a shared gift. Luma reached a bookshop where the owner liked to sort shelves by how the words inside would treat a late-night visitor, and the owner placed 3 books on a table and said, "These will keep your company gentle," and she believed the sentence and placed a paw on the covers to thank the paper for its future work. Night settled with the grace of a scarf drawn across resting shoulders, and along the embankment a musician played a soft tune that honored the bridges and the citizens and the river and the stray thoughts of travelers, and the tune had no hurry and no ache, only an invitation to breathe. Food stalls offered bowls of soup that gave off a kindness of steam, and a baker cut a thin slice of tart for a girl who had been very patient in line, and the girl promised to eat slowly and then kept her promise beautifully, and the stool felt taller because of it. Luma sat on a low stone step and watched the water hold the city like a memory that refuses to become heavy. She crossed to an island where streets grew narrow and then wide again like lungs, and there a small square hosted a circle of people who drew with chalk in an easy ring, and each drawing suggested that the ground was pleased to be noticed, and when a breeze came the chalk dust rose in a private dance and then sat down. A man folded paper boats on a bench and set them at the edge of a fountain, and children guided the boats with 2 fingers and much ceremony, and the fountain gave everyone the sound of friendly rain, and the boats nodded their little paper heads as if to say, "We know the current." Luma donated a piece of ribbon to one captain, and the boat saluted twice and sailed on. In a quiet lane she found a door that led to a courtyard paved in patterns of pale stone and framed by vines, and in the center stood a fig tree that held stories in its leaves, and a woman tended small lamps on the wall and said visitors may rest here if they agree to speak softly to their own thoughts, and Luma agreed at once. She lay on a cushion and let the fig leaves count the breeze, and the lamps hummed as if discussing their gratitude for being allowed to glow this evening, and a cat approved of everything with a measured blink from a balcony rail. The sky above the courtyard offered 3 stars and then 4, and then a pause as if to ask whether that was enough, and the courtyard said yes. From the courtyard she walked to a bridge that had learned the language of footsteps, and the footsteps tonight sounded like well-told stories reaching their final pages, and on the far bank a man painted the outline of the river on a long roll of paper, and every meter he added he rested and let the water take a look, and the water seemed to nod. A couple on a bench exchanged a few words and then gave the rest of their talk to the air, and the air held it like a cushion and did not let it fall, and the city knows how to do that when it is feeling wise. Luma listened and practiced the art of being a helpful witness who does not intrude. She entered a station where tiles remembered many journeys and the ceiling carried a soft echo like cloth, and a musician tested a phrase on a piano that waited for exactly this hour, and the phrase walked a small circle and then folded itself into the keys for later, and the people who passed felt that their steps had been noticed kindly. Trains arrived and departed with the courtesy of guests who know they will be welcome again, and signs glanced at the time and then looked away politely as if to say, "Do not worry, you are already here." Luma enjoyed how the station felt like an embrace for those who were not yet tired and a pillow for those who were. Back by the river she found a little boat that offered a slow voyage up and down the water with no commentary other than the quiet language of light, and she stepped aboard and the boat placed a blanket on the bench for her without being asked, and the blanket held the memory of many grateful travelers and released it as soft heat. The city slid by, and the reflections doubled the kindness, so that every lamp had a twin and every arch had a friend, and a waiter carried a tray of tea as if it were the simplest gift and the most important one. Luma drank and felt the tea place a modest lamp inside her chest. At a bend in the river the boat turned and drifted for a minute with the engine resting, and in that minute the city made almost no sound, and the silence did not belong to absence but to fullness, as if every building were nodding to every other and saying thank you for standing with me through the day, and the water took the thank you and wrote it over and over along its surface. When the engine resumed it did so like a whisper returning to a thought, and nobody minded, and the voyage continued with faces softer than before, and the blanket seemed to weigh a little less. Luma knew she would remember that quiet turn whenever she needed proof that rest can be generous. After stepping back onto the quay she visited a park where lamps leaned just enough to look attentive, and a gardener watered a line of young trees in round basins, and each basin filled like a small promise and then gave the water to the roots with grace, and a bench near the gate invited her to listen to the crickets counting the seconds, and the crickets counted in a language that matched her breath. A woman practiced slow movements near a statue and the statue seemed to echo those movements in stone, and two boys played a very quiet game with marbles and the marbles clicked like polite teacups. Luma rested and felt her paws thank the ground for being very sure of itself. Midnight gathered itself without drama, and the city changed clothes in a friendly way, and windows put on soft fabrics and streets placed pillows at their corners for the dreams of late walkers, and the river grew even more patient. Far bells counted a number that nobody needed to hold, and the air made a note that belonged equally to roofs and to trees, and the stars approved with minimal effort, which is their elegant style. Luma walked one last time along the books by the water and found the keeper closing lids with care, and the keeper said the pages will keep dreaming and will be glad to see you when they wake, and she touched the wood in thanks. She crossed the last bridge of the evening and stood where the city arranged sky and stone and water in a way that felt balanced like a chessboard tidied after a friendly match, and the coolness of the rail greeted her pause, and she let her gaze land softly on windows where people were talking gently or just preparing for sleep, and she wished each room a good rest without stepping inside any of them. A soft wind pushed a faint perfume of linden blossoms across the river and placed it on her fur as if pinning a small medal, and the medal said, "You walked kindly today." Luma smiled and let the medal be absorbed into the larger quiet that the city had been building since dawn. In her small room under the eaves, she opened a window toward a roof of slate and a chimney that looked like an old friend, and she placed her herbs on the sill, and the scent rose like a short song, and she set the map on the chair, and it seemed to relax as if it had been properly used, and she wrote one line in a notebook: "I walked with bridges and they walked with me," and the line drew a blanket over the rest of the page so that the page could sleep. She drank a little water that remembered stone and sky and then lay down, and the city changed its breathing to match hers, because cities can do that when they feel appreciated, and the moon trimmed a corner of the curtain, and the curtain held the trim like a good seamstress. Luma closed her eyes and kept Paris company while Paris kept her company, and they rested together.